fellow travelers. Welcome to the Pilari Present South Africa podcast, which is a podcast that follows my tour of South Africa as a local, and it particularly focuses on cultural heritage tourism in the country. In today's episode, we are going to BoKaap. In last week's podcast episode, I focused on slavery and I focused on the gruesome, violent, and tragic past of slavery. However, this week I want to do the opposite of that. I want to focus on the positive and beautiful living legacies of slavery. Because although slavery is an unfortunate and ugly past, so much so that as a South African nation, we seem to have, whether it was conscious or unconscious, however, we seem to have forgotten that past, or made it at least a footnote of history. However, despite that, um, in my observations from living in Cape Town, I've seen that slavery does have a positive and beautiful legacy, whether that be people, communities, cultures, art, food, religion. And one of those positive and beautiful legacies of slavery is BoKaap. BoKaap is a community in Cape Town that is known for its colorful and bright painted houses and also its cobblestoned streets. Um, and what I mean about that is that it has rocky streets. Typically, in contemporary road construction, roads are made out of tiny, fragmented, crushed rocks. And that's not the case in BoKaap. There are some streets in BoKaap that are made out of these huge rocks that have been cemented together to pave a road. So those are the trademarks of BoKaap. And BoKaap is an Afrikaans word that simply means above the Cape, um, or above Cape Town. And that's where you'll find BoKaap. It is a community at the top of Cape Town. And how one can get there is that when they come from the city center, all they have to do is simply walk up Whale Street. And there at the end of Whale Street, at the top of Whale Street, they will arrive at BoKaap. So let's get in some of the things that one can do when they visit BoKaap. Well, the first thing that one can do is visit the Iziko BoKaap Museum. It is a museum at the entrance of the community, and it's hard to miss because it is a museum that has a design that's very old and from a different time, which makes it stand out amidst these other houses in BoKaap that are painted in bright, colorful colors and that have modern structures. The BoKaap Museum has a design that is characteristic of early Cape Dutch architecture. And that is because it is one of the earliest homes, one of the first homes that were built when the BoKaap started. How the BoKaap came to be was when a Cape Dutch landowner and slave owner bought the land and then built small rental houses that he then leased to his slaves. And one of these houses that he built was the one that is now the BoKaap Museum. However, the museum doesn't focus on that slave past. It focuses more on life after slavery. Because what had happened following the abolishment of slavery in 1834, on the 1st of December, many slaves then moved to the BoKaap and made that their community. They made it their homes. And that's what the BoKaap Museum tells about this community whose origin is in a history of slavery, who then comes and builds this new identity, this new community, this new life in the BoKaap in Cape Town. I think it was very deliberate that they painted their houses in these bright and colorful colors, uh, because when one thinks about slavery, they think about it as this dark and ugly past. And the houses at the BoKaap Museum, I mean, at the BoKaap area, like I said, are bright and colorful, which I think is their way of showing that they're no longer defined by that dark and ugly past, but rather that they are a resilient community that have a bright and colorful future ahead. Um, and so the BoKaap Museum documents this community that is the BoKaap community. What one can find when they enter into the museum is they will learn about Islamic culture and heritage, and then they will also learn about, or get a glimpse at least, into what a life of a slave family or descendants of slaves would have been like in the years following the abolishment of slavery and then moving into contemporary South Africa. In fact, that house, um, before it became a national monument or a national treasure, the house that is now the BoKaap Museum, was actually lived in by actual slaves and slave descendants. There are photographs that you will see when you get into the museum that are plastered or printed on the walls of the museum that do show these glimpses of the life of a Cape Town slave descendant family, and show glimpses into what that life would have been like. You're also going to learn about Islamic religion, where it shows, what practices of Islamic faith happen in the house or in the home of a typical BoKaap family. So those are the kinds of things that you can learn and engage with when you get to the BoKaap Museum. I highly recommend that you visit the BoKaap Museum and get an idea of, not only the life, the life of uh, an Islamic uh, family that are descendants of slaves, but also to catch a glimpse of what Cape Town architecture was like during the period of slavery, which you will see in the design of the BoKaap Museum. What I like about the BoKaap Museum is that it is sitting at the entrance of the community whose heritage and culture it documents, which makes it unique not only from the other Iziko museums, but just museums in general. Because typically, when it comes to museums, they are they tend to be placed out of context, whether that is in time and place. For instance, a museum will tell of a time that has passed, or they will tell of a place that it is not located in, and that is not the BoKaap Museum. The BoKaap Museum um, is located in the community in which it documents, in which it teaches about. And so when one visits the museum, not only do they get to learn about daily life and Islamic culture and heritage, but then they also get to experience it as soon as they step out of the museum, and they can get to walk through the streets of BoKaap and talk to locals and experience, the people and culture of BoKaap, the people and culture that are descendant from slavery. And one way in which a visitor can do that is through using the voice map audio tours and guides app, which you can find on Apple and Google Play Store. And it is an app that has a variety of tours in different locations, in many different countries. Some are free and others you have to pay. And one of those tours that one can download is a tour called BoKaap, the Village in the City, which was produced by Shireen Habib, who is a local BoKaap resident and slave descendant. And what she does with the tour is she takes you on a deeply personal tour of her home area and takes you to parts of BoKaap that you wouldn't find, or easily find at least, on the internet. She takes you on a tour of BoKaap from a local's perspective. She takes you, she invites you into homes. She invites you into hidden streets and alleyways where there's art, and shows you the life and culture of BoKaap community. She also invites you into places where you can get a taste of BoKaap food and also experience BoKaap Islamic religion. I like that because that aligns with this podcast that is trying to guide travelers, not only domestic travelers, but especially international travelers from a local's perspective. Because initially, when I was, you know, brainstorming the idea of a travel blog, because this podcast was initially a travel blog. It was supposed to be a travel blog, but because of, circumstances and technical issues, it eventually became a travel podcast. And I won't go into the details of that. I do not want to make this podcast long. And so when I was brainstorming the idea, I was looking to other blogs, for inspiration. Um, However, as I was doing that, I noticed that many of the blogs I was coming across, they were telling the stories of people and places from an outsider's perspective. You were getting the perspective of a tourist instead of a local. And so all these places that these blogs will teach you about are just generic places. And then when I would look at, what they are saying about South Africa, I saw that there was a gap in information. I saw a similar theme where the story of South Africa and South African people and communities were being told from an outside lens, from a foreigner's perspective, from a tourist perspective. And I would be like, no, there are much more interesting things like than that. Yes, yes, those are still interesting, but there are other things that can take you deeper, deeper into South African culture and heritage. And yeah, so Shireen Habib's audio tour also does a similar thing. However, it focuses on BoKaap. And I loved that. I really loved experiencing BoKaap from a local's perspective and getting into places and seeing things that I wouldn't have seen had I just, gone there just as, just aimlessly, just going there and saying, oh, I'm just going to look around. Or had I read um, many blogs from the internet. I used her audio tour back in 2018. And her tour is one of the tours that you have to pay for. Back then it was 50 Rand, but now I think it's about 99 Rand or 100 Rand. Um, but I still think, even though you have to cough out some money to get that information, to get that experience, I think it's worth it because you get a deeply personal experience of the Boerkap and not just a tourist one. And the advantageous thing about downloading the app, a paid app, is that you get to keep it. You get to keep it. You don't pay for it for a temporary period. It's yours forever until you decide to delete it or you no longer feel it's necessary to keep. But even if you decide that you're not going to keep it or you're never going to visit Boerkap again, I think it's still worth paying for because you get information that you wouldn't get anywhere else and you get a deeply, deeply personal information. And some of the landmarks that she takes you through is or include the Boerkap Museum, of course. And there's also, she takes you to the Owal Masjid Mosque, which is the oldest mosque in South Africa. It is actually the first mosque that was established in South Africa and is still in use. However, I also have to advise you that if you do decide to visit the mosque, that you have to dress appropriately because it's a holy place. So especially if you're a woman, you have to cover your chest, your shoulders, and your legs, and also wear a headscarf. Um, Back in 2018, I remember when I was doing Shireen Habib's tour, I wanted to get into the mosque, but I was hesitant. In fact, I decided not to go into the mosque because I didn't feel appropriately addressed. I didn't feel appropriately dressed for it. Although, yes, I researched what should be my dress code if I want to go into the mosque, and I tried to dress for it. I still, when I did get to the mosque, I just couldn't enter. So what I wore a top that covered my chest and my shoulders. I carried a headscarf. However, although my legs were covered, I was wearing pants. And so I didn't feel like it was appropriate to enter the mosque wearing pants because, even though today, we can go to churches wearing pants. I go to church wearing pants. Um, I still felt like it was a very traditional holy space, and also it felt unfamiliar. And so I was like, out of respect, let me just not, you know, enter the place. And so I would advise that you also wear a skirt, yeah, or a dress that covers your legs, um, and not just pants, right? Because, yeah, especially if you're entering a mosque which is unfamiliar to you, if Islam or Muslim is is not your religion, and so it feels unfamiliar for you, I think, yeah, just make sure to, try to dress as traditional as possible so that you can respect, other people's religions and their holy spaces. So those are the kind of places or landmarks that you can see. And like I said, there are many other things. These are just the iconic landmarks that you can get to visit on the tour, which are the BoKaap Museum, the mosque. But there are many other places. Like I said, she invites you into homes, into kitchens, into streets and alleyways. And the most awkward thing that she invites a listener to is a cemetery in BoKaap. It's a cemetery that hosts the tombstone or the burial site of a figure that was prominent during slavery. Um, I forgot what was his role in that history, but he was a very prominent figure, so prominent that he, yes, it's a he is now, or his tombstone is a tourist attraction on Shireen Habib's um audio tour. I'm making this podcast from memory, so I did not research what his role or historical significance is. But yeah, these are one of the pit stops that she leads you to. And I remember feeling so awkward when I got to the cemetery. I couldn't even get into, so I got into the main gates of the cemetery, but the smaller gate that leads to the tombstone, that I couldn't get into because, yeah, I just felt like I just felt awkward and uncomfortable. Like, why am I visiting somebody's burial site? And what if his family or his descendants are staring at me, looking at me, thinking like, what is this black girl doing? Why is she going into the cemetery? So I was just like, out of respect of the cemetery and his family, I was like, no. And I was also superstitious. I was afraid that, I might enter the cemetery or at least go near the tombstones and then return with a with a spirit. Like a horror movie, a terrible South African horror movie. So yeah, I just couldn't go further than the main gate. But if that's your thing, she does invite you and, nudge you to go, closer to it. But I was like, no, no, thank you. So these are the things that you can engage with when you visit BoKaap. When you visit BoKaap, the community, you can engage with the BoKaap Museum, engage with the mosque, and engage with Shireen Habib's audio tour. Are you planning to travel through Europe soon? I've heard that traveling by train is the best way to explore the countryside and discover the historical cultural wonders of the continent. So, I am interrupting my episode to tell you about Rail Europe. Rail Europe is a trusted online booking platform for European train travel. International travelers planning to travel through Europe by train can book tickets and passes using Rail Europe's website and app. Their user-friendly website offers a simple and secure booking experience, as well as multiple payment options in different currencies, catering to travelers from all over the world. Rail Europe also connects commuters to a wide variety of train operators across 35 countries. This allows travelers to search and compare trip options to find the best and cheapest tickets available. Rail Europe is your one-stop shop for European train booking and travel. Book your train ticket using the link provided in the episode description. Discover the Alps, lakes, and cities of Switzerland using Royal Europe's Swiss Travel Pass. Travelers that purchase a first-class Swiss Travel Pass get extra free travel days at no additional cost, allowing you to save whilst you enjoy more time on your Swiss adventure. Hurry! This is a limited time offer, valid until 30 December 2025. Book your Swiss Travel Pass using the link provided in the episode description. So that's my advice on BoKaap and touring the BoKaap community. However, if you do decide to visit BoKaap, I advise you to visit around the Tweede Nuwe Jaar. And so the Tweede Nuwe Jaar is an annual Cape Minstrel New Year carnival that is hosted on the 2nd of January. Tweede Nuwe Jaar is a Afrikaans way of saying second New Year. And what this carnival and this festival or this day commemorates, it's the one day in the year that slaves were given their freedom, right? So during slavery, slaves were allowed one day throughout the whole year to be free. And that day was the 2nd of January, the day following New Year's. And so what the slaves would do during this time, they paraded through the streets and they sang, and they also painted their faces white, hence the minstrel element of the carnival. They've painted their faces white to imitate their white masters, to imitate being free like their white masters. And so when slavery was abolished, this tradition continued. And not only did it continue, it developed and grew to this spectacle that happens annually in Cape Town on the 2nd of January. And so now what happens is that there are clubs called Kapse Klopse that, will dress up in costumes, and they will also have marching bands, and they will parade through the streets of Cape Town. It is this big spectacle, this big, colorful, bright carnival that spectators can watch, that crowds can gather around. And it's a carnival that the Kapse Klopse prepares for months, guys. So it is really something to witness and watch. I would definitely recommend that you visit Cape Town and the BoKaap around this time, because the carnival and the BoKaap are heritages of slave history in the Cape Town. They are connected. So I think it will make your experience of slave heritage more dynamic when you visit the BoKaap around this time. And also the carnival, the parade does move through BoKaap. So the traditional route of the parade, the Tweede Nuwe Jaar parade, begins in District 6 in the city center, and then proceeds through the city, up Wales Street, as well as through BoKaap, and ends at the Greenpoint track. And it follows these routes because these are the communities of slave descendants, right? So I definitely recommend that. I have to say that personally, I haven't witnessed the Tweede Nuwe Jaar with my own two eyes. I've only seen it on TV, but live there on the ground, I haven't yet witnessed it. But just because I haven't seen it with my own two eyes doesn't mean that you guys should not. I highly recommend it. And then come back to the podcast in the comment section of this episode and tell me, what is it like witnessing the Tweede Nuwe Jaar? What is it like being in that crowd and being a spectator of that parade? Before I conclude, I just want to touch a little bit on District 6 because I did mention that District 6 is a community that the parade moves through, and this is because it is also a slave community, or was a slave community, because the District 6 as a neighborhood, as a residential area, no longer exists. Um, it is just a memory of the past, of history. However, following the abolishment of slavery, District 6, like BoKaap, was one of the areas that slaves move into to create their communities, to build their lives and build their homes. However, during apartheid, it was in the 1960s, yeah, it was declared a whites only area under the Group Areas Act. And this is because as the community grew, it became more cosmopolitan, which means it hosted different races, different groups of people, which really contradicted apartheid's ideas that that it built its government on, that said that different groups of people and races can't live harmoniously with one another. Not only was it Cape Coloureds, who are the descendants of slaves, living there, but there were also white and Jewish people and African people all living amongst one another in this community. And so the government of the time, the apartheid government, decided that no, we are going to destroy this because it goes against our ideals. And so the community was bulldozed to the ground. The people that lived there were forcibly removed to the outskirts of the city. And whatever buildings, houses, apartments were left, those were bulldozed to the ground to develop, to make room to develop a white only community. However, the irony of that is that after that destruction, they did not develop that white only community. In fact, the land was left undeveloped and it's still barren to this day. When you're driving on the M3, whether in the direction from the southern suburbs or the city center, you, at some point along that stretch of road, you will see down below you this open field, this open patch of land, uninhabited patch of land, very close to the city center, which is odd. It's so odd to see an open area in a city center, and that is where BoKaap, that is where District 6 was. Sorry. That is where District 6 was. If that is a history that you're also interested in learning about, you can visit the District 6 Museum, which is located at Buiterkant Street in Cape Town City Center. And it tells, this history of District 6. It does a similar thing to BoKaap. It tries to talk about the daily life of a family, a typical family in District 6, what the their homes inside was like, the culture of the community, the art, the prominent people that came out of that community. And I think what makes it different then from BoKaap is that it also tries to talk about its role in the struggle against apartheid. So do that. If you're interested in the District 6 Museum, do go visit at Buiterkant Street. Um, I have to say that it is not an Iziko museum. It's not part of the Iziko Museum's portfolio. It's an independent museum. And so there is a rate that you have to pay regardless. However, with that said, there are different rates for each category. For example, there's a different rate for children, different rate for students with valid students card, for pensioners, and so on. So you will pay a fee. And so that's it for today's podcast episode, where I was focusing on the positive living legacies of slavery in South Africa. This is one of them. These are some of them, because I listed a number of things, which is BoKaap, Tweede Nuwe Jaar, and District 6. But in the sense, you'll visit the District 6 museum, um, instead of, a community, because that community has been demolished. And so, in closing, I would like to advise that, um, you know, if you do decide to, you know, visit Cape Town to learn about slave history in Cape Town, I'd advise you to commit a day to do all of these things on the same day, because it's so easy to navigate. So go to the Izigo Slave Lodge Museum, followed with a visit to the old old slave auction tree memorial, and then go up to BoKaap, do a tour, an audio tour of Shireen Habib's um, guided tour, and then if you have time, you can go to District 6 Museum, but that's optional. You don't have to really do that. And then end your day with a visit to the company gardens, to reflect on Cape Town slave past. Because that garden, although it's beautiful, it's a very beautiful place to visit and, exist in. I'm not gonna go into the stories of, my time there, but I've been there a couple of times. And yeah, just reflect on the Cape Town slave past, because it was built by slaves. Although it is beautiful, it is deceptively beautiful, because it hides the truth that it was built by slave. It's the reason why slaves were brought here to build the company gardens. It's called the company gardens because they were owned by the Dutch East India Company. So that is the whole impetus of why slavery came to be in the Cape Colony, which is now Cape Town, to build a refreshment station. And that refreshment station was the company gardens. So reflect on it. Cape Town is deceptively beautiful. There's a lot of things that are menacing, that are hidden under the beauty of Cape Town. Although it's a very beautiful past, a beautiful place, it hides a very ugly past, and that is of slavery. But yet, even though it was ugly, there are beautiful things that are living, that have come out of that, past, that you can engage with and celebrate. And yeah, I also advise that when you do all of these things, preferably do them around the Tweede Nuwe Jaar, and you'll get the full experience of what is it like to be, or what was it like for slaves, and what is it like to be a descendant of slaves, or slave, or slavery. Oh, guys, my tongue is leaving me. It's starting to betray me. So that brings me to the end of my podcast episode. Thank you for listening. Keep good, make good choices, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Goodbye.